Now, take your own particular form of fear. Look at it. What's your reactions to it? Can you look at it without any movement of escape, justification, condemnation or suppression? Can you look at that fear without the word which causes the fear? Thought creates in time the feeling that you are afraid, which is not an actual fact. The actual fact is that you are well, but the experience, which has remained in the mind as a memory, rouses the thought. So, what we are afraid of is the repetition of the old, the thought of what has been projecting into the future. Therefore, thought is responsible for fear. This is so, you can see it for yourself. When you are confronted with something immediately, there is no fear. It is only when thought comes in that there is fear. Thought is essential at certain levels, but when thought projects itself psychologically as the future and the past, creating fear as well as pleasure, the mind is made dull, and therefore inaction is inevitable. Most of us want to have our minds continually occupied, so that we are prevented from seeing ourselves as we actually are. We are afraid to be empty. We are afraid to look at our fears. If you follow what the psychologist says, or what I say, you are understanding our theories, our dogmas, our knowledge. You are not understanding yourself. It is of yourself that you must ask the question. When you understand that fear is a single movement which expresses itself in different ways, and when you see the movement and not the object to which the movement goes, then you are facing an immense question. How can you look at it without fragmentation, which the mind has cultivated? Thought looks at the total state of fear, or tries to look at it, and reduces it to fragments. Therefore, we see that the mind can look at this total fear only when there is no movement of thought. Can you watch fear without any conclusion, without any interference of the knowledge you have accumulated about it? If you cannot, then what you are watching is the past, not fear. You can watch only when the mind is very quiet, just as you can listen to what someone is saying only when your mind is not chattering with itself, carrying on a dialogue with itself about its own problems and anxieties. Can you in the same way look at your fear without trying to resolve it? Can you observe a cloud or a tree or the movement of a river with a fairly quiet mind because they are not very important to you? But to watch yourself, it's far more difficult because there the demands are so practical, the reactions so quick. So when you are directly in contact with fear or despair, loneliness or jealousy, or any other ugly state of mind, can you look at it so completely that your mind is quiet enough to see it? If you look merely at the details of fear, or try to deal with your fears one by one, you will never come to the central issue, which is to learn to live with fear. To live with a living thing such as fear requires a mind and heart that are extraordinarily subtle, that have no conclusion, and can therefore follow every movement of fear. Then, if you observe and live with it, and this doesn't take a whole day, it can take a minute or a second to know the whole nature of fear. If you live with it so completely, you inevitably ask, who is the entity who is living with fear? As you watch, you learn that the observer is merely a bundle of ideas and memories without any validity or substance, but that fear is an actuality, and that you are trying to understand a fact with an abstraction which of course you cannot do. The observer is fear, and when that is realized, there is no longer any dissipation of energy in the effort to get rid of fear, and the time-space interval between the observer and the observed disappears. Then fear comes totally to an end. Fear, pleasure, sorrow, thought and violence are all interrelated. I want to live on this marvellous earth, so full, so rich, so beautiful. I want to look at the trees, flowers, rivers, meadows, women, boys and girls, and at the same time live completely at peace with myself and with the world. If we are going into the question, we must, it seems to me, be at the least very serious about it, because it will lead us into quite a different domain. But if we want merely to play with the problem for intellectual entertainment, we shall not get very far. If you yourself really want to understand this problem of violence, let us continue on a journey of exploration together. I must be in a state of mind that demands to see this thing right to the end, and at no point stops. It is violence when we use a sharp word, when we make a gesture to brush away a person, when we obey because there is fear. Violence is much more subtle, much deeper, and we are inquiring into the very depths of violence. When you separate yourself by belief, nationality, tradition, it breeds violence. So a man who is seeking to understand violence does not belong to any country, to any religion, to any political party or partial system. He is concerned with the total understanding of mankind. The moment you protect your family, your country, a bit of coloured rag called a flag, a belief, an idea, a dogma, the thing that you demand or that you hold, that very protection indicates anger. Can you look at it completely objectively, which means neither defending it nor condemning it? It is very difficult to look at anger dispassionately, because it is a part of me, but that is what I am trying to do. I am not concerned with whether I have inherited this violence, or whether society has produced it in me. All I am concerned with is whether it is at all possible to be free from it. It is destroying me and destroying the world, and I want to understand it. I want to go beyond it. I feel responsible for all this anger and violence in the world. I feel responsible. It isn't just a lot of words, and I say to myself, I can do something only if I am beyond anger myself, beyond violence, beyond nationality. And this feeling I have that I must understand violence in myself brings tremendous vitality and passion to find out. But to be beyond violence, I cannot suppress it. I cannot deny it. I must become very intimate with it, and I cannot become intimate with it if I condemn it or justify it. So, first you have to learn. You have to learn how to look at anger, how to look at your husband, your wife, your children. You have to listen to the politician. You have to learn why you are not objective, why you condemn or justify. You have to learn that you condemn and justify because it is part of the social structure you live in, your conditioning. I must know how to analyse, which means that in the process of analysis, my mind becomes extraordinarily sharp, and it is that quality of sharpness, of attention or seriousness, which will give total perception. One hasn't the eyes to see the whole thing at a glance. This clarity of the eye is possible only if one can see the details, then jump. The man who is really serious, with the urge to find out what truth is, what love is, has no concept at all. He lives only in what is. To investigate the fact of your own anger, you must pass no judgment on it. For the moment you conceive of its opposite, you condemn it, and therefore you cannot see it as it is. If you look at it, go into it completely, it ceases. This requires very deep meditation, not just verbal agreement or disagreement. Your conditioned mind, your way of life, the whole structure of society in which you live, prevents you from looking at a fact and being entirely free of it immediately. The house is burning as a result of the violence throughout the world and in yourself, and you say, let me think about it. Which ideology is best to put out the fire? In all our relationships, each one of us builds an image about the other, and these two images have relationship, not the human beings themselves, and we are always strengthening these images by adding more and more to them. Relationship based on these images can obviously never bring about peace in the relationship, because the images are fictitious, and one cannot live in an abstraction. All our relationships, whether they be with property, ideas, or people, are based essentially on this image forming, and hence there is always conflict. Such abstract living must inevitably bring about a relationship which becomes a battlefield. In all our relationships, whether with the most intimate person, or with a neighbour, or with society, this conflict exists, conflict being contradiction, a state of division, separation, or a duality. Observing ourselves and our relationships to society, we see that at all levels of our being there is conflict, minor or major conflict which brings about very superficial responses or devastating results. Man has accepted conflict as an innate part of daily existence because he has accepted competition, jealousy, greed, acquisitiveness and aggression as a natural way of life. When we accept such a way of life, we accept the structure of society as it is, and live within the pattern of respectability. And that is what most of us are caught in, because most of us want to be terribly respectable. When we examine our own minds and heart, the way we think, the way we feel, and how we act in our daily lives, we observe that as long as we conform to the pattern of society, life must be a battlefield. If we do not accept it, and no religious person can possibly accept such a society, then we will be completely free from the psychological structure of society. What society has created in us, and what we have created in ourselves are greed, envy, anger, hate, jealousy, anxiety, and with all these we are very rich. Those men who have assumed the robe of poverty are still inwardly, psychologically rich with the things of society, because they are still seeking power and position and prestige. They belong to this order or that order, this religion or that religion. They still live in the divisions of a culture, of a tradition. Poverty is to be completely free of society. One must become poor inwardly, for then there is no seeking, no asking, no desire, no nothing. It is only this inward poverty that can see the truth of a life in which there is no conflict at all. Such a life is a benediction, not to be found in any church or temple. To understand and to be free of any problem, we need a great deal of passionate and sustained energy, not only physical and intellectual energy, but energy that is not dependent on any motive, any psychological stimulus or drug, or stimulation, whether of the church, or of alcohol, or of drugs, or of the written or spoken word. These will inevitably bring about dependence, and that dependence prevents us from seeing clearly for ourselves, and therefore from having vital energy. If we inquire together, we will both discover, and therefore that discovery will be your own, and hence, being yours, it will give you vitality. Why do I depend? Because in myself I am shallow. In myself I have nothing. In myself I have no source which is always full and rich, vital, moving, living. The discovery of the cause is merely intellectual, so obviously it does not free the mind from dependency. The mere intellectual acceptance of an idea, or the emotional acquiescence of an ideology, cannot free the mind from being dependent on something which will give it stimulation. What frees the mind from dependence is seeing the whole structure and nature of stimulation and dependence, and how that dependence makes the mind stupid, dull, and inactive. Seeing the totality of it alone frees the mind. Whatever thought investigates must inevitably be fragmentary. So, I can see the totality of something only when thought does not interfere. Then I see the fact of my dependence. I see actually what is. I see it without any like or dislike. I do not want to get rid of that dependence, or to be free from the cause of it. I observe it, and when there is observation of this kind, I see the whole picture, not a fragment of the picture, and when the mind sees the whole picture, there is freedom. Now, I have discovered that there is a dissipation of energy. When there is fragmentation, conflict will inevitably rise so long as there is a division between what should be and what is, and any conflict is a dissipation of energy. Contradiction exists when there is comparison, not only with something or somebody, but with what you were yesterday, and hence there is a conflict between what has been and what is. There is what is only when there is no comparison at all, and to live with what is to be peaceful. Then you can give your whole attention without any distraction to what is within yourself, whether it be despair, ugliness, brutality, fear, anxiety, loneliness, and live with it completely. Then there is no contradiction, and hence no conflict. Your mind has ceased to create the opposite, and has become highly intelligent, highly sensitive, capable of intense passion. Because effort is a dissipation of passion, passion which is vital energy, and you cannot do anything without passion. It is not the objects of desire, but the very nature of desire which is contradictory, and I have to understand the nature of desire before I can understand conflict. There is, of course, duality in nature, man and woman, light and shade, night and day, but inwardly, psychologically, why do we have duality? You have a concept of what you should be, and how you should act, and all the time you are in fact acting differently. So you see the principles, beliefs, and ideals must inevitably lead to hypocrisy and a dishonest life. It is the ideal that creates the opposite to what is. So if you know how to be with what is, then the opposite is not necessary. A mind that is confused, whatever it does, at any level, will remain confused. Any action born of confusion leads to further confusion. I see this very clearly. I see it as clearly as I see an immediate physical danger. So what happens? I cease to act in terms of confusion anymore. Therefore, inaction is complete action. If you say you are free from something, it is a reaction, which will then become another reaction, which will bring about another conformity, another form of domination. In this way, you can have a chain of reactions and accept each reaction as freedom, but it is not freedom. It is merely a continuity of a modified past which the mind clings to. Freedom is a state of mind, not freedom from something, but a sense of freedom, a freedom to doubt and question everything, and therefore so intense, active, and vigorous that it throws away every form of dependence, slavery, conformity, and acceptance. Such freedom implies being completely alone. This solitude is an inward state of mind which is not dependent on any stimulus or any knowledge, and is not the result of any experience or conclusion. We all know what it is to be isolated, building a wall around oneself in order never to be hurt, never to be vulnerable, or cultivating detachment, which is another form of agony, or living in some dreamy ivory tower of ideology. Aloneness is something quite different. You are never alone because you are full of all the memories, all the conditioning, all the mutterings of yesterday. Your mind is never clear of all the rubbish it has accumulated. To be alone, you must die to the past. When you are alone, totally alone, not belonging to any family, any nation, any culture, any particular continent, there is that sense of being an outsider. The man who is completely alone in this way is innocent, and it is this innocency that frees the mind from sorrow. The mind that is alone is not only innocent, but young, not in time or age, but young, innocent, alive at whatever age, and only such a mind can see that which is truth, and that which is not measurable by words. In this solitude, you will begin to understand the necessity of living with yourself as you are, not as you think you should be, or as you have been. To live with something like jealousy, envy, or anxiety, you must never get used to it, never accept it. You must care for it, not condemn it or justify it. When you care for it, you are beginning to love it. It is not that you love being envious or anxious, as so many people do, but rather that you care for watching. Is freedom to be achieved through a gradual process? Obviously not, because as soon as you introduce time, you are enslaving yourself more and more. Freedom can only come about naturally, not through wishing, wanting, longing, nor will you find it by creating an image of what you think it is. To come upon it, the mind has to learn to look at life, which is a vast movement, without the bondage of time, for freedom lies beyond the field of consciousness.